We mentioned that after Kennedy wrote his thesis and graduated from Harvard in 1940, that he enrolled at Stanford University in the graduate program, but he dropped out 6 months later. He took a trip through South America, and then he enlisted in the United States Navy because of the events of World War II. And we told you that in the Navy, the 22-year-old Kennedy was given command of a PT boat squadron in the Pacific theater of the World War II, and we told you what that was, right? And we told you that his boat was called PT-109. Is that where we kind of ended? Yeah. Okay, well, to tell you what a patrol boat looks like, or a PT boat, it's about 78 to 80 feet long. Not very long, it's a small boat. Kennedy would be on that with 13 crew members. In other words, it would be himself and 12 others. It's a 78-foot long boat that's made basically of wood. There's not any metal on it, so it's, you know, it's very vulnerable, okay? But the idea behind a patrol boat was twofold. They were going to patrol and spy and see where enemy vessels were, or they would sometimes lead an allied vessel out of harm's way by having them follow and be looking out and scouting ahead. That's kind of what those boats did. Okay, well, Kennedy got himself in an interesting situation that went down in history, which began on August 2nd, 1943. On August 2nd, 1943, Lieutenant Kennedy and his PT-109 boat and his men were patrolling the Pacific Ocean on assignment on August 2nd of 1943, and shortly after midnight, which would have been August 3rd, his PT boat is hit by a Japanese destroyer, which is a great big boat, which basically cuts his boat in half. Okay? And the destroyer doesn't see him because it's dark and he's small, and Kennedy really doesn't see the destroyer because it's just pitch black, and this Japanese destroyer runs over basically the PT-109 boat and splits the boat in half and keeps on going because they don't even really realize what they've done. Okay? Well, what do Kennedy and his men do at that point? Well, it's dark, so he's going to keep them put, so they're basically going to hang on the wreckage until light. Unfortunately, 2 of his crew were killed in the initial collision. So he loses 2 men dead in the initial collision, and the rest of the men and himself basically hang on wreckage in fiery water until light comes. Now, they are in enemy waters, so what's their next move, Rachel, when they decide it's time to do something the next morning? What's their choices? Sit there and maybe get ate up by a shark or drowned, or be picked up by the enemy, right? Or what else could they do? Swim. And what Kennedy did is he ordered his men to swim to a nearby island, which was 3.5 miles away. So his men swim 3.5 miles. Now 2 of them are dead, which they leave there, and 1 was very badly injured. He was so injured he couldn't swim. So Kennedy actually towed him, swam him the 3.5 miles. Now Kennedy had back problems from youth, right? He also hurt his back in the initial collision. So he's not doing all that great, but they swim to a nearby island, which was 3.5 miles behind enemy lines. Kennedy had damaged his back in the initial crash, and even though he was injured, he towed one of his injured men that 3.5 miles to that island. Now that island was only 100 yards in diameter, okay? And so it was not a very big island, and guess what it didn't have on it? Food or water. So they're stranded on this small island, which is behind enemy lines, with no food or water. What's the only water they get? They do get very little water, but they do get some. Where do they get it from? Rain. Combination of, it didn't rain so much then, but it had previously rained or the dew, and they drank it off the leaves of the tree. What did they eat? Bugs, insects. That's exactly right. So as they're on that island, they are eating bugs and insects, and the very little water they get's coming off the palm trees from the moisture on those. Now, Rylan, you're John F. Kennedy. What's your next move? I mean, you're going to stay there and starve to death is what you're going to do. So you got your choice of staying there and starving to death, or staying there and getting caught and being a prisoner of war, which would not be good in World War II. What's your next option? What? What do you think? What would you do next if you were commanding these men? You got them there and you're responsible for them. What would you do? Well, they say that they're going to die or get caught. No question about it.
Alright.
What are you going to do?
I don't know, like, those movies where you get all those rocks, like, something like that.
Okay, maybe. That's not bad, but he's behind enemy lines, so you probably don't want anybody to know where you're at, right? So what they're going to do, nobody really gets this, what they're going to do is he and another man are going to take turns for several nights swimming out into the channel with only a flashlight in shark-infested waters to try to do what? Hail down a friendly boat that might be going by. Okay, so he goes out, swims out, way out into the channel with a flashlight in shark-infested waters, comes back the first night, no luck. His partner, another officer under his command, goes out and does it, and they do this for a couple, 3 nights, to no avail. In other words, nothing happens. So, Emily, what do you do now? Huh?
I guess it's each one.
That's exactly what they did. He ordered his men to swim to another island, hoping that they would have maybe coconuts on that island, so they have something to eat and water. So he did. That's exactly what he did. He had his men swim to another island because staying on that one wasn't going to work. So again, they're swimming in shark-infested waters to another island. Well, luckily for him, this island did have coconut trees and water, so they're in better shape than they were the first time. Okay, but they're still behind enemy lines, which is not good. They really don't want to get caught. You think they want to get caught? No, that would be not good. Well, one morning they are sleeping, they haven't woke up yet, and 2 island natives, those would be natives to the islands, maybe a little bit primitive, you know what I mean, not cultured. These 2 natives, all of a sudden, as Kennedy's men are waking up, are standing over the top of them holding rifles, Japanese rifles. And their first, what would be your first reaction to that is these guys are on which side? Japanese, because they have their rifles. So right away you could have really a tense confrontation. So Kennedy's men wake up, and they're woken up by these 2 native islanders who are both standing above them, so to speak, holding Japanese rifles. Well, if you're those men, what might be your first reaction? Sit there or do what? Take action. You know, we'll try to get control of them. If one of us gets shot, that's better than all of us, whatever. Well, Kennedy, and this is the great thing about him, he was a thinker and a good negotiator. He settled his men down and he started to make contact, verbal contact with his natives, and found out that they indeed were not their enemy. Okay, finds out they're not. Now, the next thing he does is he asks these natives if they will take a note or deliver a message across these enemy waters to Allied commanders. Would you be willing to take a note, if I write a note, let them know our situation, back? They said, okay. So Kennedy picks out his paper and pen and he writes this note that he's had the whole time that's just as dry as can be, despite the fact that they have swam probably 7 or 8 miles. And he writes this note and he gives it to the natives and they take the note and the day's saved. Is that true or false? Partially true. He carves a note on a coconut. You have a picture of that. I handed that to you. He carves a note on a coconut. And basically it says, Commander, native knows position, he can pilot, 11 alive, needs small boat, and he signs it Kennedy. And he takes this coconut and with his knife carves in this message and gives it to these 2 natives, and he asked those natives if they would take it to a friendly command, which they agreed to do.
So
Okay.
was true with the pen and paper?
What?
Everything was true with the pen and
Everything was true with the pen and paper, but we got a little more of the story. So these natives take that coconut and they rode 38 miles in that primitive canoe and delivered that message to an Australian coast watcher by the name, he's right up here, of Arthur Evans. He is a coast watcher from Australia who actually was later quoted saying that he saw the explosion of PT-109 from his lighthouse, but he didn't really know what it was. But these natives bring this coconut to Lieutenant Arthur Evans. I don't have him on your ID sheet, I'm just telling you the story. And he gets the message. Okay? Well, what if you got that message, what might be your first concern? Is this legit or not? So what they do is once the message was delivered, they asked the natives to go back to the island and just bring Lieutenant Kennedy back. Because they got to verify the story here, so right? So that's what they do. They rowed the 38 miles back. They put Lieutenant Kennedy in their small canoe and cover him with palm leaves because they are rowing through enemy waters and he's in uniform. But the Japanese never paid any attention because these natives were always rowing around these islands. And he takes Kennedy back to Allied command. So the natives row back to the island, they put Kennedy in their canoe, they cover him with palm trees and row him back to safety. Well, once he got back and they legitimized everything, they made arrangements, and on Sunday, August 8th, American PT boats picked up and rescued the remaining survivors from PT 109. Okay? So, they verify things, and then finally on Sunday, August 8th, 1942, or 3, excuse me, or was it? 43, they rescue Kennedy's crew. Now, if you look at that handout I gave you, Kennedy kept that coconut, he retrieved it, and he had it preserved, and he kept it for the rest of his life. It was encased in plastic, which you have a picture of. He had that on his desk when he was in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, and he had that on his desk when he was President of the United States as a reminder that you can overcome anything. Now, many years ago, I finally, after many attempts, got an appointment with Senator Edward Kennedy in Washington when I had my kids there. And I was fired up. Then Nixon dies the week before, and so guess where Edward Kennedy was the day we were supposed to meet him? At President Nixon's funeral, okay? But they did let me into Senator Edward Kennedy's office, and guess what was on his desk? And I was so excited I didn't even take a picture, because we didn't have cell phones these days, you actually had to have a camera. And I didn't bring my camera, and I was just, nobody had a camera. Those, you know, everybody's got a phone now, right? In the old days, a lot of kids brought cameras, but you had to put film in them and pay for it to be developed, and it was a whole different game. I didn't even get a picture, but it was a thrill. The coconut now is at the John F. Kennedy Museum in Boston. But I mean, they still have it, but he kept it all those years, okay? All right. Well, the harm to Kennedy's back during this ordeal led to his honorary discharge from the Navy in March of 1945. So the damage that he incurred led to his honorable discharge from the Navy in March of 1945. And when he got back, he was awarded with the Marine Navy Medal for Bravery. He was awarded the Marine Navy Medal for Bravery. Now, you don't have to write this down because we're trying to shorten this up so we can get to the present. But there's a picture up here of Captain Frederick L. Conklin, a picture of him giving Lieutenant Kennedy that Medal for Bravery, signed, very rare. So, he is given the Medal of Bravery from the Marine and Navy. Now, this is what he said when he got his medal. You don't have to write it down. He said, "The real heroes are not the men who return, but those who stay out there, like two of my men include." So he gave the credit not to the people that return as heroes, but the ones that do not return. Well, this became such a popular story when he became president. No, I mean, it was a good story until then, but when he got to be president, it was more of a story, right? And so a guy by the name of Robert Donovan, and if they're not on your ID sheets, you don't have to worry about it, wrote this book called PT 109, John F. Kennedy in World War II. And John F. Kennedy, if you can see in the back, he was consulted, okay, he was consulted, and the story's true because the guy that did it was the one that consulted the story. Now this became so popular that they came out with a movie later starring Cliff Robertson known as PT 109. If you're surfing your channels from time to time, you might find this on one of the older channels, TBS, WTBS, or whatever. It's a pretty good movie, and it tells the story of PT 109. So my point is, it became very popular, and Kennedy was consulted. Matter of fact, some of you know about my JFK signature I have in my office, back down the guidance house. I have a JFK signature. Well, this friend that sold me that, because he's a big collector, had got his hands on doodles that President Kennedy was a doodler. And Evelyn Lincoln, who we'll talk about, his personal secretary, used to save everything. He'd throw something in the garbage and she'd save it. Anyway, she had saved these doodles that he had made when he sat down with Robert Donovan and wrote that book, and she saved it. Well, my friend got a hold of 3 or 4 of those, and he wanted me to have the first chance to have one, and I could have had one piece of paper with doodles and had a little drawing of a ship. $1,600 is all I would have to pay for it. But I was thrilled to death that he gave me a chance to buy it if I wanted to. I just didn't do it. So I don't know if he still has them or not, but that's kind of stuff we're talking about. All right. Well, anyway, after Kennedy's military career, it was time for him to enter politics, but he really wasn't the one interested in him doing that. Does that make sense? He really wasn't the one that came up with the idea, hey, I should go into politics. Who'd that come from? His father, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. And there was a reason why Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. turned to his son. Now, again, we're shortening this up so I don't give you the whole lecture on the Kennedy family, but Rose Kennedy and Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. had a lot of children. The oldest child was Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. And the reason that John Kennedy got pushed into politics is because of the fate of his older brother, because Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. was the apple of Joseph P. Kennedy Sr.'s eye. He had big plans for him, and he was the one that was going to be President of the United States. That's the one. Because John Kennedy always had a little bit of a aloof relationship with his father, wasn't the favorite son, so to speak. And so Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. looked upon Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. as the one that was going to do these great things. Unfortunately, Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., who also joined the armed services during World War II, was killed in action. He flew an experimental plane mission. He volunteered for it, didn't have to, that was going to drop a bomb in Europe. The bomb detonated before it left the airplane and blew him up, and remains were never found. We do have a memorial stone of his, you'll see in D.C., that, you know, of his death. But he didn't exist anymore. And so what did Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. do? He expected his next son in line to pick up the torch and go into politics, and that's why he did. Okay, just so you know. So Joe Kennedy asked his son John to enter politics, where you just don't get to be president, you have to work your way up. So in 1946, John F. Kennedy ran for and was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, representing the state of Massachusetts. So in 1946, John F. Kennedy was elected to the House of Representatives. And during that time in the House, he met a pretty young lady who was the daughter of a wealthy Wall Street broker by the name of John V. Bouvier III. Who did that report? Anybody in here do that report? So, during his time in the House, John Kennedy meets a pretty young lady. She is the daughter of a wealthy Wall Street broker by the name of John V. Bouvier III. What is this young lady's name? Jacqueline Bouvier, or better known as Jackie to her family and friends. So he meets Jacqueline Bouvier, better known as Jackie, at a dinner party in Washington, D.C. when he's in the House. She is the daughter of wealthy Wall Street broker John V. Bouvier III. And they begin to court, or date, that's what we call it now, courting in those days. And as they're courting, John Kennedy decides that he's going to now run for the United States Senate. That's kind of the next step up. You're going to get yourself in a position to be president. And in 1952, he decides to run for the Senate. And in November of 1952, he is elected to the Senate. So he runs for the Senate, he's elected. Guess who he defeats in that Senate race in 1952? What? No, it was Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. So he defeats in 1952 for the Senate seat Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. Why is that a familiar name? Come on now. Is that not a familiar name to you? He ran for vice president with Richard Nixon, remember, in 1960. So Kennedy actually defeated Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. 2 times in his political career. He defeated him for the Senate race in 52, and then kind of defeated him because he ran with Nixon for vice president in 1960. Okay, so he's now a senator. Well, he enjoys time in the Senate for a short period of time, and then he and Jackie were married. It was the wedding of the decade, and his political career begins in the Senate. Okay? So in 1953, he marries Jacqueline Bouvier, and he begins his career in the Senate. Now the Kennedys, how many children the Kennedys have? Anybody know? You've heard probably of two.
But they had one of them.
We've all heard of Caroline Kennedy and John Kennedy Jr., I'm sure, but they actually had 4 children. The first was born in 1956, a stillborn daughter. Stillborn daughter in 1956. She is buried with the president at Arlington right now. Okay? I want you to pay attention to these dates when these other children were born. Caroline Kennedy, C-A-R-O-L-I-N-E, was born on November 27th of 1957. November 27th of 1957. She was the second born. Third born child was John F. Kennedy Jr., and he was born on November 25th of 1960. November 25th of 1960, John F. Kennedy Jr. And the fourth child born to John and Jackie Kennedy was Patrick. And Patrick was born on August 7th, 1963, and died August 9th, 1963. So just 2 days. He was born very premature. His lungs were not developed, could not breathe well. Medicine and technology was not the same in those days, and he died. So they had 4 children. A stillborn daughter in August of 1956. Caroline was born on November 27th of 1957. John Jr. on November 25th, 1960. And Patrick, August 7th, 1963, died August 9th, 1963. Now, what's the significance of the dates of the children that lives births? John Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. The